Okay, folks, Part B. Here we discuss some material from a pretty good consulting organization, the Gartner Group, and they have a concept called the hype cycle, which is quite informative in telling us what's important in life. So let's just go through this. There are actually longer descriptions of this in previous year's version of this course. This has been shortened. All right, so this is a hype cycle. And it has this interesting shape with a peak, a dip, and then a rise, and then a flat. And that's the innovation trigger, the peak of inflated expectations up here, the trough of disillusionment. And actually, if you're in bad luck, you actually fall through that trough and disappear. Then if you make it through that trough and show that the negative remarks people made at the peak were unwarranted, they rise up through this plateau, slope of enlightenment, and enter the plateau of productivity, and you make your first $1 billion. And this particular slide has some sort of comments about who's important: early adopters, first generation products. Negative press starts when it gets too hyped. You get further rounds of venture capital at this stage. They hopefully give you the thrust to boost through here. You get second generation products and services, 5% of the audience, and up here we're doing 20 to 30%. So clouds are at 90%, so they're way past the plateau of productivity. All right. So here, just as one example, was the 2019 hype cycle, which I have a rather complete amount of information. I used to have a subscription to Gartner. I no longer do. And so recently, the last one I just got from the web. And when you do that, you don't get all the information. But 2019, and that's actually covered in detail in last year's course, I have all full detail on what they're doing. So when we look at what's here in 2019, it's got lots and lots of AI and deep learning. Let's see, we can just probably count the ones that aren't deep learning. Well, autonomous driving is all deep learning. 3D sensing cameras, well, they're probably useful for deep learning. Next generation memory, well, that's a computer technology. Graph analytics, it's a machine learning, it's not deep learning. 5G, that's a communication methodology. That's obviously important, but not deep learning. Here we have biochips, again, something different. Now we have AI, platform as a service, edge analytics, the highest possible level of autonomous driving. Level 4 and 5 are ones that you will consider pretty good. Low Earth orbit satellite systems. Well, we're hearing lots about those things being launched. Edge AI, explainable AI, personification. Well, that's again not really AI, although AI is probably pretty relevant there. Knowledge graphs, that's AI. Synthetic data, well, that's probably motivated by AI. Delivery drones, well, that's autonomous. Emotion AI. Transfer learning, that's AI. Flying autonomous vehicles, AI. Augmented intelligent AI. Nanoscale 3D printing. By the way, these triangles here are saying more than 10 years. They used to have quantum computing on this, which was always a yellow triangle saying more than 10 years. It got dropped off, just actually as the federal government made a huge investment in quantum computing. Decentralized web, that's probably not AI. Biotech, culture, tissue, that's not AI, although actually we would argue AI is pretty important in doing that. Augmented reality, that's got a lot of AI in it, has to have immersive workstation spaces. All right, so here we are, mainly AI. Very little about the infrastructure such as clouds. All right, and now for 2019, I have this so-called priority matrix, which they issue every year, but the particular place I got 2020 didn't have it. And what's most interesting is what they think is transformational, because that's really the hot stuff. And here we have augmented intelligence, we have our autonomous driving, we have biotech, that's not AI, AR clouds, decentralized autonomous organization that must have something to do with AI, emotion AI, GANs, generated adversarial networks, immersive workstations, low Earth orbit satellite, next generation memory. And the division between high and transformational is not so big. And of course, for some reason, transfer learning, which is actually not, is pretty well established as a part of AI for helping deep learning. And then we have flying autonomous vehicles. Why they're moderate importance and autonomous driving is transformational, I'm not quite certain. On this slide, we have a general discussion of hype cycles and priority matrices. Gartner views the hype cycle as having two basic components. One is sort of the hype level, which shows the enormous interest that is present at the beginning of any project. That's this thing here, up and down. And then we have the maturity component, or the production component, which is this gradually growing thing, which could in some cases be zero if it doesn't make it into production. That's when things disappear through this trough. And then we have this combination, which has this rather pretty shape. Then there are many hype cycles. We will get a few more examples. The emerging technology was possibly the first, is certainly the best known, and is the overall hype cycle for the world, of the key things that are being done. Then we have the priority matrix, which you've already illustrated, which essentially tells you the time scale and the benefit. The benefit has these four categories: transformational, high, moderate, and low, where we're really focusing on transformational and high. And then we have time scales, which is from less than 2 years to more than 10 years. And more than 10 years is obviously quite speculative. It's where you see quantum computing and self-driving cars, truly self-driving cars. And they also, for if you're a venture capitalist, it tells you how to invest, and you can see which of these boxes is best for a particular type of investment. But that's not the purpose of this class. All right. Now we come back to the beginning of the world. When I started working on cloud computing was 2008. And here we are, cloud computing. So that's why I was working on the cloud computing. Was still on this, well, it is called technology trigger. It's now called innovation trigger. We still had exactly the same shape. And if we look at what's out here, the things I used to work in before 2008 were service-oriented architectures, web services. And of course, people can remember, and I remember virtual worlds being very popular around that time. They, I think, effectively disappeared there, although with the current thrust in augmented reality, they're trying to be reinvigorated. Obviously, things like SSDs are now completely common. They're way up here on the productivity curve. While Facebook, Instagram, what have you, are really thriving social computing platforms. So those have really also moved over here. But anyway, you can see when we started, AI was nothing here. There was green IT, cloud computing, and augmented reality, which is still trying to make it through. Actually, they did correctly predict it was more than 10 years. Robots, well, you could say robots are actually quite successful. In some aspects, robots are fully deployed now. Although I don't think they've had quite the impact people expected. We don't have at every home has a robot butler introducing the guests and things like that. Content delivery architecture, well, that's difficult to believe that was still in that stage in 2008, because that's how you get all your videos and things like that. All right, so that's 2008, and we identify correctly cloud computing. And here is the mapping into benefit level and time. And there they said cloud computing was 2 to 5 years. Well, that probably was about right, actually. SOA, however, in some sense, shouldn't be in the same category as cloud computing because it was in the plateau of productivity already today. And it is a universally adopted principle, but it's not viewed as transformational, in my opinion. It's just good, solid software engineering. Social computing platforms. Wow, they're transformational. Probably here, 2 to 5 years. That was a mistake. Okay. It's fun to look at these. I have nearly a lot of them. Now we come to actually when this class started, at least around when it started. I forget exactly which year because I evolved it over from initial classes. This is when I first introduced a MOOC along these lines. It was in 2014. And we had our first data science class in spring of 2014, in which this class was one of the earlier data science certificate classes. And I've put with red arrows what I think is interesting. Here we have quantum computing, which is now wasn't there in 2008, but is there in 2014. Here we have the Internet of Things. Well, that's the edge computing. Still important. Not quite made it to the jugular. Data science. That's why several of you are here. And here we have various AI, content analytics, predictive analytics, smart robots. Well, in-memory database systems, we know those are very important to get things to work fast. Big data, here we have the deluge sitting here. It's certainly whipped through here very quickly. And cloud computing is now here, and it certainly didn't go down here. It went right up here. Okay, fun. This graph here, which is a hype cycle from 2017, I put it in because it had these nice three things: digital platforms, transparently immersive experiences, and AI everywhere. Well, I like AI everywhere, so that's they identified as one of their themes in 2017. Independent of these curves, they have themes, and they also identified digital platforms. I told you have to be digitally savvy, so you suddenly need a digital platform. Immersive experiences. Well, people. I remember I used to work on virtual reality in 1999. I put a huge effort into building some very sophisticated systems, and it didn't work because of the network speed. It just failed miserably. There was a thing called VRML, virtual reality markup language, and we built a lot of models using that. And we were a technical success, but a practical failure. But it's still not really made it, in my opinion. And I don't think that, because the main reason I see it's not so exciting is that to participate in an immersive experience, you have to become immersed, which means you disappear from the world. Well, that's not obviously a good idea. Let's move on. Here we have this year's 2020. I held up on that because it's actually not as rich as some of the others because there are no clouds, no quantum computing, but that was true before, and it's almost all AI. Carbon-based transistors are a bit different, but ontologies are AI, explainable AI, social distancing technologies. Well, that's not particularly AI. Embedded AI. Well, the data fabric is needed for AI. AI augmented development. Composable enterprise. Well, that's all probably due to AI effectively. And so on. Digital twins. That's the area we work on. That's basically building simulations of complex systems. And here we have all sorts of variants. Here we have GANs, brain-machine interface, self-supervised learning. Here we have edge computers, and so on. All right, so they're not all AI, but they're not far from all AI. And there is no infrastructure of importance in this plot because the infrastructure is just so good. It's not in these plots. Here we have, but Gartner does have hype cycles, presumably every year, for these things which may not appear on the emerging technology. Now, one thing that does is artificial intelligence, but it has a separate hype cycle for artificial intelligence. I don't have access for that for 2020, but for 2019, it's got a lot of pretty interesting entries which you can study. I notice I'll have a slide later on about the success of GPUs. Speech recognition is a hugely successful deep learning application. Voice, voice to text, language number one to language number two. That's natural language processing applications. And so here we have FPGA accelerators. That's what goes into your Alexa bot to make it run the deep learning faster and so on. Computer vision. Well, I told you I have a module on image-based applications. That's due to computer vision. Autonomous vehicles. We've mentioned that many times. Okay, here we have this priority matrix, and you can see most of them are transformational, or at least high. There are only a few which are moderate. Just FPGA for some reason is moderate. Moderate. It's not so exciting to me, actually. I think it's reasonably clear what you can do and what you can't do there. I don't think it's transformational. Speech recognition is undoubtedly transformational, and it's effectively transformed. They're now, speeding up all those algorithms so they run in real time and things like that. So you do not have to send your speech back to the cloud, but your little Alexa smart speaker can use its chip to do the to run the inference engine on itself and not go back to the cloud. This one for AI does have quantum computing, which is slightly bizarre. I don't think quantum computing for AI is its most exciting application. This I do like, artificial general intelligence. That's building the AI-based person. Obviously useful. Maybe. Here we have cloud computing. So poor old cloud computing, which lost out in all the jazzy app graphs, is sitting here. Actually, not so many entries, and you don't get so many of this. This is obsolete before it made it up the trigger. I'm not even certain what it is. Service mesh, that's again a rather detailed technology. Cloud native, I like that. That's building applications that really can exploit clouds extremely well. Cloudlets, this is building applications on the edge which look like clouds. So the edge is sort of a mini cloud. Distributed clouds, well, that's people have been working on that for some time, and it's the issues there are not terribly deep. They're just practically very hard because different clouds are owned by different people with different policies, and they're not guaranteed to work together. Things over here: platform as a service, infrastructure as a service, software as a service. These are all hugely successful. So a private cloud, we pointed out in that Cisco graph that a quarter of all clouds were actually private. Cloud bursting is what, say, Eli Lilly does. You run your chemistry simulation on your HPC Lilly cluster, and if that runs out, you burst it out to Amazon. Here we have the 2019 Cloud Computing Priority Matrix, and we see as is appropriate for a non-transformational but incredibly important area. There are not so many transformational things. Cloud computing is still given the benefit of being transformational and software as a service. Why that's terribly different from infrastructure as a service or wherever the hell. Where's platform as a platform as a service is also transformational. Yeah, I would tend to actually consider platform and software as a service as more important than infrastructure as a service. Here I told you we should do edge computing. And the only reason we're not is I don't have the jugular application to put by it. Okay. Here we have the final slide of this section, which is just for fun. It seems to be done by Gartner, unless it's a complete fraud. And it's the hype cycle for emerging quarantines, where you have various things like do taxes in the Plateau of Productivity, or even doing something as old-fashioned as reading a book. And then we know that the quarantines had The idea of being able to stock up on toilet paper is very important, and doing a Zoom for your high school reunion is obviously a great idea. And here we have Learn Python. That will be useful for you. My daughter keeps asking me about chemistry, and she also wants to paint the walls, which I'm not so keen on. Bitcoin is a very controversial concept. I think it's technically quite straightforward, but whether it's actually a useful quantity or totally hyped is not so obvious. All right, so that's the end of this part of section B of the introduction, and have a little fun on this particular graph. But the hype cycles are really there just to tell you what you should be focusing on as where you can see the major change coming. But as I keep telling you about cloud computing will be involved in all changes. It just won't change. It will just be like it is today, probably to first approximation. So that's it. Thank you very much, folks.